inspectors of Reddit. What's the worst thing you've ever found when inspecting a restaurant shop? Story 1, I can tell you what they didn't find. When I worked at Denny's, when the health inspector came, the cooks took all the expired food out of the fridge and stored it in their cars and by the dumpster until after the health inspector left, and then they put it all back. I ended up quitting that job after I got written up for refusing to change the dates on the labels of all the expired food, which was one of the primary jobs of the graveyard server. Story 2, a tuna canning plant in Los Angeles was off of Terminal Island. The processing plant owned the entire island a few miles offshore. Needless to say, had to take a boat to the plant to look at some machinery they needed repaired. We get to the plant, and there are dozens of cats inside the plant, outside the plant, warehouse, etc. Cats everywhere. Nobody said anything. They were even in the office building. After a few trips, I finally asked. One guy said in a joke, "It's either rats or cats. We don't have a rat problem here." Story 3, not a health inspector, but heard this story through a guy who services my soft-serve machines. As info for those not in the ice cream business, most soft-serve machines need to be cleaned, meaning fully disassembled, scrubbed, and sanitized at least weekly, some every 3 days. He got a call from a woman complaining that the vanilla side of her machine was coming out with black specks in it, was worried it might be grinding up an O-ring or worse. He took the head off the machine and claims he nearly lost his lunch, as the barrel was infested with cockroaches. Apparently, the woman had never cleaned the machine in the several months she had been open. Somehow the roaches got into it at night. The barrel stops freezing and just keeps the mix cool, so it returns to a liquid and we're being ground up and expelled as additional protein. How long has it been doing this? About a week. Story 4, so many horrible Chinese restaurants in this thread. So I thought I'd give a shout out to the one I used to work at years ago. The owner was meticulous about cleanliness. Every night the kitchen staff would scrub the floor and everything else down with soap and hot water. The dishwasher ran so hot you could see the steam rising and had to wait for them to cool down before you could touch them without burning your hands. That place was clean and served some of the best Chinese food. The owner eventually retired and sold his land. Boy, do I miss the hot and sour soup. Story 5, high-end Thai place in a popular tourist area. Go downstairs to the kitchen and open up their freezer. On the top shelf of the freezer, they're storing loose beef and chicken in 3 separate piles. The meats are not in any containers. They're all sitting on a large piece of cardboard the restaurant had placed on the bottom of the shelf. We poke the cardboard and our finger goes right through it. The juices from the 3 meats had turned the cardboard into pulp. We then notice it dripping from the combined sludge of chicken and beef blood. From the looks of the cardboard, it had been dripping for a while. We looked to the shelf below to see the results of the drip. Underneath the meats in the shelf second from the top, the restaurant was storing 3 buckets of ice cream, without lids, directly under the meat drip. We look inside the ice cream containers and see congealed, partially frozen, cardboard-laced raw meat drippings, pooled in the center of each tub of ice cream. None of the ice creams were more than halfway full. We asked the kitchen manager how long they've been storing their items like this. He doesn't remember, at least a few months. My theory is because the place was a nice restaurant and be an ethnic restaurant, patrons are less likely to complain about odd flavors. For example, instead of complaining about blood in the ice cream, wondering out loud if that taste is star anise. That's one of the few inspections that made me feel physically sick. Place still got an A because the restaurant grade system in my city is about as effective as TSA. Story 6, so a friend of mine is a health inspector. She walks into a local convenience store and discovers a litter box behind the counter. Totally unacceptable. Tells the proprietor that he needs to get rid of the litter box. That's kind of a health code violation. He replies, "Well, it's for the cat. We've been having mice rat issues." To which she's all, "Oh." Cat walks up. She tells him he can't have a cat in a food establishment. He hands the cat to his wife, and she takes it out of the store to their camper trailer nearby the store, waits for her to leave, rinse, and repeat. Story 7, worked in a restaurant, and whenever a health inspector came, I had to go to the kitchen to tell the cooks to put on gloves and hairnets. It's not that they didn't wash their hands or anything. They were old school with cooking, but still it was a violation. Story 8, health inspector here. Here are my top 3. An old liquor store, which had once been the front unit of a housing duplex, had now covered into full-service deli sandwiches, fried chicken, etc., without plan review, so they were severely lacking in all the proper space and equipment. Observed were rat infestation droppings everywhere in the place. Mountains of old cast-off equipment in the back giving the rats a home. Meat defrosting on the hood of an inoperable car on the side alley. Back unit of duplex, now converted to food storage, had unfinished wooden boards on the floor, which were now soft and rotting from soaking up years of meat juice and everything else. While inspecting a Chinese buffet, I noted to the employees that there were tubs of frozen fried shrimp stacked on top of one another without covers, so they needed to discard the top layers of the food and put on the tub lids. As they scrambled to do so, they knocked over the tower of shrimp, spilling it everywhere. As I was standing there, they hurriedly started scooping the shrimp off the floor and back into the tubs. I am standing right here, you guys. A guy ordered commercial sausage-making equipment delivered to his private home. Manufacturer got suspicious and tipped off the health department. Turns out the guy would go hunting all sorts of exotic game meat without permits, process them into sausages in his rat-infested garage, droppings the size of jelly beans, and was selling them to the public. Don't buy food from home cooks, folks. Edit 1 been trying to fix a numbering, but it's not going through, displaying 1, 2, 3 on Edit's page, but keeps showing 1, 1, 2. Thank you all who have pointed out. Edit 2 reverted to good OL bullet points. Story 9. So this is from the other side, but pretty unique. A long time ago while I was in college, I used to maintain aquariums. Quite a few were in restaurants. There was an old-school seafood restaurant that had a ton of tanks, great customers, and a cool place. I would be out there at least once a week for half a day making everything spotless. This was before cell phones, you youngsters. I am in class, and my pager, yes. Pager is blowing up from their number. I call, and one of the Mexican staff picks up, and all I could gather is, "Please, Mr. Fishman, you come now. Very big problem emergency." I head out there, and there are health inspectors there. So, for all the tanks I take care of, if a fish dies, I ask the owner to put it in a bag and freeze it so I can take a look and see if I can figure out why it kicked the bucket. Well, one of their very old and very large and pretty beat-up blue tangs dory had died, and they had froze it per instructions. The inspectors show up to this seafood restaurant, and first thing they see is this decrepit old fish that had been munched on by the other fish in the tank alongside the catch of the day. It was before opening, and only the Mexican staff were there who had no idea how to explain it. I got it sorted out, but kind of funny. Edit, you guys seem to be enjoying this story. So here's another aquarium cleaning story I posted a while back that involved dildos. Story 10 was a health inspector long ago. Was at a Golden Corral, going through the kitchen area. As I was squatting down to check a dishwasher, my foot broke through the tile floor and into a sewer pipe that ran underneath. Cockroaches come boiling out of the hole. Turns out the entire floor was rotten from a water leak in the sewer pipe. Best worst part, the general manager tried to fight me when I told them they had to close down until they fixed the open hole into a pipe full of cockroaches and waste. Story 11, the mid-'80s, I managed a pizza delivery store, and the health inspector came by kind of late and asked me to step outside. He started by apologizing, but it was his job to follow up when they have a specific complaint concerning food safety, but this one was odd. He proceeded to tell me a customer complained that while they were in the store, 2 male workers had on the counter and didn't even wash their hands. I very dryly responded that couldn't have happened, as we always wash our hands after having on a cutting table. With a small grin, he said that's what he thought, and he appreciated our efforts. He was our inspector for several years after that. Story 12, not a health inspector, but when I was in my late teens, I worked at a 5-star restaurant where they were using potatoes and other produce with maggots in them consistently. Restaurants like these easily charge people $285 to $350 a head for events like New Year's Eve. They got shut down. Story 13, not exactly a health inspector, but I work with licensure for healthcare facilities. You'd be surprised how many of them are totally unprepared for emergencies and would probably all die if there was a fire or worse. Story 14, late to the party, but I used to work on my own as a baker in a supermarket, and the cleaners would come in at 10 p.m. at night when the last worker left, and he would be finished by 2 a.m. when I arrived. Well, one day I was half an hour early, and I walked up to my department, and the cleaner was mopping the prep tables and the equipment with the same water he had used to clean the floor. I wish I was joking. To use the mop on the tables to begin with is stupid, but using his same water as well. Insane. I told his boss when he came in because I simply had to, and his face was a picture. He really didn't believe me until I got and had a look on CCTV. Oh, I forgot he wasn't supposed to even touch the machinery. That was my job. So he was dirtying my already clean equipment. Story 15, not an inspector, but my so told me about what happened at a popular seafood restaurant in my town. A guy working the fry station had a magnetic kitchen timer above the fryer stuck to the hood vent above. One day, the timer fell into the hot grease. They managed to fish out the main plastic part, but the batteries were nowhere to be found. It was determined that the batteries must have disintegrated into the grease. Being a seafood restaurant in the South, half the menu is fried. The owner is too much of a skinflint to stop serving fried food and change out the grease during dinner rush. So whoever ate catfish that night had it fried in a tangy, alkaline grease. Story 16, guys. It's my first time in Bangkok, Thailand. I just went on a food tour. I don't know if you know about Bangkok, but it's humid as here. Some of the vendors had fish sitting in cardboard, flies, cockroaches, rats, etc. As far as the eye could see, I ate all the food, though. I'll let you know if I die. Edit and passed the 24-hour mark for the most questionable thing I ate. So we all believe we're in the clear. Thank you all for your concern, and especially the people who eat this food every day and reassured me that my concerns are completely valid. Haha. Story 17, not a health inspector, but I used to be a busboy at a nice Italian restaurant in my hometown. We had problems with the Chinese place across the street because we found out that they had been taking the lettuce that we throw in the dumpster at the end of the night. Our manager used to stand outside and guard the dumpster, so they wouldn't take our garbage. Another experience working at a local cafe, I was cutting up cheese from a walk-in fridge, and I found a hole in the cardboard box that the cheese was kept in. Turned out it was from rats or mice, and they were eating the cheese. Told my manager about it, and he told me to cut around the bite marks and still use the cheese. Left that job shortly after. Story 18, I once finished up a foodborne illness investigation, not finding much that could have caused the illness, and left. I parked my car on the other side of the street in full view of the restaurant I was just at. I watched the dishwasher come out the back door, light a cigarette, smoke for a minute, then hunch over and puke all over the grass. Then he took another drag and went back inside. I have mild emetophobia, so I got a bit of cold sweat, then ran across the street and basically dragged us outside. I've got a lot of stories, but that was the worst for me. Story 19, 14-inch border of mold dirt scum all the way around the edge of the restaurant. Boxes that had 5-year-old shipping labels blocking the path to the mop buckets mop sink. No sanitizer buckets, no sanitizer cloths, no sanitizer. Mold in the fans blowing over open food in the cooler. Didn't bother finishing the inspection. Just shut them down. Story 20, yes, a specific restaurant that I came across comes to mind. Before I go on, let me say that there was nothing wrong with the food this restaurant was serving at all. It was the atrocious and criminal customer service that almost ended with me 6 feet under. As tradition in health inspector business, I started off by ordering a bit of everything on the menu. Of course, this was mostly done to surprise the chef, and to keep him on his toes, we had to make sure the ingredients being used were fresh and prepared in a clean manner. Anyways, after my first order, I was catered to as if I was a movie star. Of course, this was common behavior, as almost all restaurant owners make the waiters kiss up to you all in hopes of a better scoring. This particular restaurant, however, was a bit too eager and was nearly spoon-feeding me, but I thought nothing of it at the time, and after politely asking them to leave me alone to do my job, I began to indulge in some of the most flavorful food I have tasted to this day. Everything was cooked to perfection and the veggies fresh as ever, after having the food make love to my taste buds. I was nearly all done with my job and ready to give the restaurant a perfect score. However, there was one thing I hadn't tried on the menu. See, this restaurant was famous for having one of the best burgers around, and I, of course, had to indulge in it as a customer, not a health inspector. Of course, I wasn't going to tell them this. I asked them to bring the burger, and they eagerly did so. This is where things get a bit nasty, though. The burger, as far as I could tell, seemed normal, and I was dying to give a bite. So I took my time to make sure I was prepared to taste the famous burger that had been recommended to me so much throughout the years by my peers and colleagues in the health inspector industry. I guess I took too long to take a bite, and a fly flew right into the back of my mouth like a bullet. I began to choke loudly and quickly motioned to one of the waiters for a glass of water, but they simply just stood there watching me. I was confused and began to panic as I seemed to run out of air. My eyesight began to get cloudy, and the room began to spin as I passed out. The next several hours are still a blur, and I only remember bits and pieces, but even then I'm still confused on what's actually true and what my brain has made up from the trauma. All I know is I later woke up in the restaurant muddy, with several gashes on my head, and 2 police officers. My tip for all health inspectors out there: avoid the Krusty Krab. Story 21, not a good inspector, but once I ordered tacos from a high-end vegan restaurant in LA. When I bit into the taco, I felt immediately a hard chunk gently slice in the roof of my mouth. I pulled out a 1-inch shard of glass from my taco. Management said they accidentally broke a glass near the tacos, and they thought they got all of it. They offer a new plate of free tacos, but I was like, my mouth is bleeding. Why would I want another taco? Story 22, not a health inspector, but read public health inspection reviews. There was a Burger King near me that had black mold in the ice machine, and large holes in the kitchen where rats had eaten the walls and buried through. There was also a KFC that was cited for having broken glass and other debris on the serving line. I really don't get that one. Story 23, I do a lot of polishing and chrome plating. I'm not a health inspector, but I do a lot of work for restaurants. I got a call to chrome plate some refrigerator racks. It's common request. These are large 36 to 48 long racks grills that the food sits on. This one high-end steakhouse that I used to go to calls me in. Their racks were literally falling apart, rusted joints, old food hanging off of them. Just disgusting. I explained it can't be repaired, but they insisted that we just shine them up, do whatever is needed. I refused the job, left, and wanted to throw up. Never went to that restaurant ever again. Immediately called the health department on them. Don't know what happened. Story 24, obligatory, not a health inspector, but a place I love got shut down by one. I actually caught her on the way out and asked what was up and if she'd think they'd reopen. The lady let out a long laugh and just went, "Oh, no, 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 no," and then went on her way. So I don't know what she found, but apparently it was bad enough that she found the idea of them reopening to be a joke. Story 25, not a health inspector, but I've seen some. The worst was a restaurant a friend took me to. He loved it and said it was on him, but God, if it wasn't the sketchiest joint. If he hadn't spent the whole trip talking about how he eats there twice a week and loved it so much, I probably would have left. The place was disgusting. Mold on the walls, dirty floors, piles of unwashed dishes on the customer tables, etc. When we left, I happened to notice the health inspection sign. They'd gotten a 36,100. I didn't even know it was possible to score that low and stay open. Story 26. Pizza place right near UMass had a dungeon, and the guy that ran it wouldn't wear pants when making subs. Story 27. I work next to a Chinese restaurant. One of my coworkers has seen one of the Chinese restaurant owners clipping their toenails right behind the counter. They also don't have proper ventilation. Story 28, non-inspector, but I worked at sushi and hibachi restaurant for about a year as a server, host, and delivery driver. This place had a ton of things that were certainly questionable, but a few of them ended up causing me to leave the place. In the dry storage area, they had cleaning chemicals directly above all of the Togo food packages and plastics, where in that same room, which was really big, I'd randomly see a sleeping bag and pillow tucked away every once in a while. It always stuck out, but I never really thought too much into until I went back to grab a bottle of wine, and sure enough, had stepped on a sleeping woman. She started yelling, and I just ran out. My manager pulled me aside later, which I assumed was going to be a conversation about keeping that hush-hush, but no. The dude offered me $25,000 to marry a Thai chick, so she could get a green card. My response to him was my 2 weeks' notice. Story 29, the best answer and Sprague's response. Story 30, I helped my dad run his restaurant for a good 5 years, and my dad was and still is to this day a big fan of people seeing the fresh food as it was made, so we never had doors to the kitchen from either customer entry point, despite my insistence on it. Sure enough, it was the only thing the health inspector ever docked us for, and my dad solved the problem by just putting doors in but never closing them. Story 31, I worked in the deli of a convenience store for nearly 15 years. It was a constant struggle to explain to my boss how I couldn't save the leftover chicken and veggies and sell them the next morning. My customers were happy to pay more knowing the food was always fresh. 6 months ago, boss decided to lease out the kitchen and move me to the main store. Ex-customers keep coming to me to complain about the food tasting bad and making them sick, so I went back to check and counted about 6 violations that would get them shut down or fined. Clorox bleach stored on the floor next to chicken breading. Defrosting meat stored above the vegetables, it drips down onto the veggies. And at the end of the day, the cook takes all the food trays and puts them, uncovered, into the fridge to sell the next day, without letting them at least cool down. It smells like rotting food back there since they never clean out the drains. I've also seen her cutting uncooked meat with a machete on the bare floor, and she never ices down the raw chicken at the end of the day, so it starts to stink by midweek. Boss has lost half his regular customer base. Story 32, I'm a New York dairy inspector, and I inspect a lot of Jewish dairies. What I've noticed is the Jewish community in my area loves to do their own inspection. The problem is they leave milk bulk tank doors open, and rats, flies, and other critters get into the milk. The big problem is they never ask to do the inspection, they just walk onto the property and do their thing. Actions like that can shut down the whole industry. Story 33, obligatory, not a health inspector, but I work for a local council in the UK and was asked by our environmental health officer, EHO, to assist with a rat infestation. They wanted me to arrange for the tunnels that the rats had burrowed to be filled with concrete. We followed the tunnels along the footway and into the kitchen of a World Bar and Grill, one of those buffet places that do food from all around the world. As an all-you-can-eat deal, these tunnels were only small. But once we got into the kitchen, there was over 200 rats. They were in and on everything, droppings everywhere, nests everywhere. The place was disgusting. I should point out these rats have been there for up to 6 months, and the restaurant was still open up until the day of the inspection. The guy who owned the place offered to pay extra if we could do it quickly, so he could reopen. The EHO laughed and said the place was going to be condemned until he was happy to eat food off the floor. Story 34, a restaurateur was trying to reopen a failed one into a new one. It had been a Mexican joint, Was going to be a deli. I was working for a pest control company, and they called us to take care of a few bugs. No big deal. They're just proactive. I get there. It's clean. It smells okay. But I'm about 1 month into this new job and experience. I go to get started, and I'm mixing up that we have to use in restaurants, and I'm using the water from one of their triple sinks. The water is coming out hot. It's a Vegas summer, so I'm letting it run until it cools down some. I look over at the floor sink the triple sink drains into, and there's a lot of German cockroaches coming out of it. This water will do. I fill up the 2 gallons, put the pump handle back in, and shake it to mix it. Pump it to pressurize in it and get to work. When you start with a full canister, there's less air, so you have to stop and pause to repump it to keep the pressure up. As I'm going to hitting all the cracks and crevices behind the sinks, the equipment, under everything, the seam and the wiped down plastic walls, etc. Roaches are just pouring out into the open. It's in the 1,000 stage, where now when I stand still, they're trying to hide under my boots. The last time I have to stop to pump up the canister, I'm standing on its stainless steel with a brass handle between my feet. This I call on a radio for a coworker who I know is nearby, because he has a fog unit, and I don't at this point, newly hired. Wasn't 100 kid out. Tony swings by, I'm waiting outside, and we renegotiate the service. The new owner had been a little on the light side with the depth of his problem. He agrees. We get a fogging. Tony's showing me how to do it. So I'm just walking behind him. At this point, there's tens of thousands of roaches everywhere, floor, walls, ceiling. We get to the walk-in, and above it, where I think the compressor was a 4-foot H by 8-foot by 10-foot space. Tony directs the fog stream up in there, and the roaches start pouring out in such numbers that briefly, you can barely see the stainless steel of the walk-in door. The entire rest of the day, any little itch on my skin, you're leaping to slap it, and check it's not a roach stuck on you. Obligatory, not a health inspector, but I am a regional health department that employs health inspectors for my Food Protection Bureau. We've seen rotten animal carcasses processing meat on-site, aka butchering sheep in the parking lot. People serving meat from crazy types of animals. Sometimes when our inspectors arrive on site, an employee will yell to the back kitchen, and there will be a frenzy to throw things out to the dumpster outside before we can catch it. If the public areas of a restaurant are dirty, the kitchen probably isn't any better. If staff members you interact with are poorly trained, those you don't have contact with, such as the person making your food, are likely to be the same. In short, whatever you can't see probably mirrors or is even worse than what you can. We hosted an AMA on our city sub with some more info on the general health inspection process. Feel free to read. Story 35 worked in a popular sandwich shop. Our floor drains were smelling rancid for weeks and were backing up with what was assumed to be sewage. My manager told our owners every single day for 3 weeks that this needed to be fixed, and they did nothing. So in the middle of my shift one day, a health inspector came in and immediately shut us down. My manager told me right there that she anonymously called the health department because that was the only way the owners were going to end up fixing the problem. Major LOL. Story 36 worked in a McDonald's years ago, and I had a coworker that would lick her index finger every time she peeled a cheese slice off of the stack of cheese we would use to make cheeseburgers. It was as if she was trying to separate a sheet of paper from a stack of papers. I would watch her do this all day. I never said anything, and I sure as never ate the cheeseburgers. Story 37, I worked as a chef in SF for a couple of years. Every restaurant I worked in was clean, but most of them still had a rat problem, including rat droppings on food-safe surfaces. At those places, we plastic wrapped everything, including plates and silverware, and surfaces we put food on, nightly. Story 38, we found a market that was raising and slaughtering live sheep in the back parking lot. My supervisor has a picture of a sheep head that's sitting on the prep table next to food that was ready to eat, meaning it's not going to be cooked anymore. He raised a local news story about it. He says he's ready to comply, but that market never reopened. I think the news story really hurt his business. Story 39, the current kebab shop I work at, everything is clean, well kept, everything is well maintained. The owner has a twin who also decided to open a kebab shop. I went to visit a few weeks ago. The cheesecakes are left in low-temperature cupboards rated than freezers, which isn't cold enough, so they have bright green mold. Every single egg there is expired. I checked with the egg and water test. The pizza doughs have all gone bad. You can even tell from the smell. There are milk cartons in the fridge that have been there for around 2 months. He offered me to come work there for $9 an hour, which in England is a lot for someone my age. I said no, and I don't regret it. A health inspector is going to come there soon, and close it anyway, hopefully. Story 40, I am a health inspector for FL. I do not inspect restaurants because that is the Department of Business and Professional Regulation, DBPR. I work for the Florida Department of Health. We inspect schools, assisted living facilities, drug rehabs, and their respective food service. If they have one, we also do other stuff, but that's off topic. We do go with DBPR if we get a foodborne illness report of 2 or more, or if it's confirmed. Out stuff, At least my facilities aren't so bad, just minor stuff here and there. But one of the other inspectors has an ALF that had obvious evidence of rats. Equipment that is broken, a mop sink that was ripped off the wall and on the floor. Everything was dirty and gross. And there was a hole in the ceiling from water damage, so they cut a hole to repair it. I usually just have people making minor violations repeatedly, like not labeling items, dish machine not working, dumpster open, etc. Nothing like roaches running around or anything, thankfully. If anyone wants to know more, I can tell you pretty much anything I want, as it's all public record, so I don't have to be hush-hush about things. Story 41, not a health inspector. I worked at a dining hall in college. During a health inspector visit, the health inspector knocked over a bunch of the papers we wrapped burritos in on a nasty floor. He proceeded to place all the contaminated papers back on the counter to be served to customers. Even healthy inspectors have given up on college dining services. Story 42, our local health inspector told us a funny conversation he had with a restaurant owner. H.I. pulls bug out of already prepared food. What's this? Owner, that's a bean. H.I. beans don't have legs. Story 43, not a health inspector, but when I was working at Papa John's in Eastern Washington State, one of my coworkers would always come in with glittery, long, manicured, and painted fingernails and refuse to wear gloves on the make line where the pizzas were made before going into the oven. She would regularly handle cash payments, then, without washing her hands, start prepping a pizza without gloves on, getting loads of cheese, raw dough, and other chunks of food stuck on her fake nails. Our manager never corrected her on this. She was an airhead high school senior. And the manager was a gross perv that kept her around until she was 18, only so he could legally ask her out. Guy was married with 2 kids and in his 30s. He fired her when she turned him down after she was 2 minutes late to her shift. But one night, when it was just me driving deliveries and her answering the phone and making pizzas, I got a complaint from a customer I delivered earlier saying that they found a melted Lego in their pizza. Sure enough, Miss Manicure looked at her nails, and one of her press-on nails had come off and apparently melted when it went through the oven on top of my customer's pizza. She didn't give about the angry customer at all. She just called her older sister to come over to the restaurant to bring her box of fake nails and nail glue, and replaced it again without washing her hands after handling money and raw meat all night, and went about her merry way. I put in my 2 weeks' notice the next day. That place was a zoo. This thread is a weight loss superfood. Story 44, I once worked in a restaurant where we pulled a half-eaten chicken back out of the bin, rinsed it under the tap, and gave it back to the complaining customer. They demanded a new chicken as the order receipt fell in the dish and was served on top. No harm done, just a minor mistake. This chicken was our last of the day. The customer wanted it back, so they had it back, a little different than before, but back in front of them covered in gravy. Story 45, I lived above a family-owned diner. They closed at 3 p.m. and stayed until around 6 p.m. every evening to clean. On several occasions, the city health inspectors left with a carry-out dinner. This place opens at 6 a.m. and closes at 3 p.m., and never once did I ever see people not waiting to be seated. There are some great ones, too. Sorry I went off topic. Story 46, not a health inspector, but I worked as a janitor prep coop busser at a restaurant outside of D.C. There was this dishwasher there named Santana, who was a great guy, older gentleman who didn't speak much English and came from Latin America somewhere. Anyways, I guess growing up he didn't have the luxury of wasting food. So, whenever a dish would come back with food on it, Santana would scarf it down as he worked. If that wasn't gross enough, he once chopped off like the first joint of his finger while working prep and literally just threw it out and kept working. Eventually, the head chef noticed his glove was full of blood. So he dug the finger out of the trash and drove him to the hospital. Santana was a good guy and a good worker, but some of the stuff he did was just downright nasty. Story 47, during a fire inspection of a fast food chain, I went to check the extinguisher in the kitchen, and when I lifted it out of its cradle, I was swarmed by a multi-generational family of cockroaches. I proceeded to drop the extinguisher and squeal at a frequency that I haven't been able to produce since, and flee the kitchen. Not a lot bugs me, but the sheer volume of the roaches and the ferocity at which they attacked is something I have not experienced since. Story 48, not a health inspector, but used to work in a place where I don't know how we passed any inspections. Best bet he was paying him off. Chef never cleaned his hands, was in Italian, made amazing pizza, and I used to get a free one every Friday. Stopped accepting after I saw him wipe his nose on his hand and keep kneading. Saw the world's biggest rat in the bar. Now, I love rat, snakes, mice, you name it, but I screamed and ran to the other end of the bar. He told me to shut up and go back, else the clients would realize it was there. He knew about it. Asked me to go do dishes. I walked into the kitchen. Grime on the walls, floor, counters, and dishes piled on the sides and the floor. Spend 4 hours trying to bleach the ever-loving of it. Hose attached to the hot pipe. The whole shebang. Quit that evening after staining my work clothes and getting badly burned by the water. Still didn't get it fully cleaned, but it made me sick.